My brothers and my sisters, there are moments in history when the clock strikes not just the hour of the night, but the hour of destiny. There are phone calls that do not simply disturb a man's sleep, but awaken an entire people. And when the world's most calculating strategist reached for a secure satellite phone at 3 in the morning, he was not calling to command. He was calling because he could no longer control. Yes, I am speaking of that call. Putin called Ibrahim Traoré at 3 a.m. Not a headline, not a rumor, but a turning point that shook the foundations of power itself. For 47 minutes, across thousands of miles, in flawless French that startled even his closest aides, Vladimir Putin laid bare a truth he had never admitted to any world leader before. And the man who heard it, the man who carried it, was not a general in Moscow, not a diplomat in Washington, but a 35-year-old African revolutionary standing on the red earth of Burkina Faso. Stay with me now, for what I am about to share is more than politics, more than diplomacy. It is a revelation that stretches from the Sahel to Harlem, from Ouagadougou to Atlanta, from the villages of Mali to the streets of Chicago. It is a revelation that proves when family scattered by slavery and colonization remembers its unity, even the Kremlin must pause, even the mighty must tremble. Before we go further, let me invite you. Subscribe, join this community, and walk with us through the story of a conversation that did not just echo through a phone line, but thundered across history. My beloved elders, listen closely, for history is not written in the comfort of palaces alone. Sometimes it is carved in the dust of villages, in the cries of markets, in the boldness of young men who refuse to bow. 6 months before that midnight call, something happened on the red soil of West Africa that had not happened in 60 years. Something that caused the corridors of Paris, Washington, and Moscow to buzz with disbelief. 3 nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, stood as one. Nations long marked as fragile, nations once spoken of as dependent, suddenly lifted their voices in unison. And with courage that startled even their critics, they declared, "Foreign troops must leave." French bases, once untouchable, were told to pack up. Western military outposts, once assumed permanent, were shown the door. For the first time in living memory, African soil was cleared not because outsiders had chosen to withdraw, but because Africans had chosen to stand. My brothers and sisters, do you hear it? That was not just a political decision. That was the breaking of chains. For decades, every time one base closed, another opened. Every time one dependency ended, another dependency began. But this time was different. When the dust of departing convoys rose above the horizon, it did not carry the banner of France nor the flag of Russia. No, it carried the colors of a sovereignty that was African, decided by Africans for Africans. And yet, the world watched with suspicion. They whispered, surely Moscow must be behind this. Surely Beijing must be orchestrating this. But when the truth emerged, it shook the strategists in their war rooms. These 3 countries were not exchanging one master for another. They were not replacing French uniforms with Russian advisors. They were not choosing East over West. They were choosing themselves. Now let me take you deeper, for independence is not secured by words alone. Sovereignty must be rooted in economy. And the boldest step came when Burkina Faso announced to the world, we will no longer ship our gold raw to foreign refineries. We will refine it here, with our own hands, with our own minds. Do you grasp what that meant? For decades, Africa sold raw gold at $60 a gram, only to watch foreign companies refine it and sell it back at $200. For decades, $140 of value per gram left the continent, fueling cities abroad, while villages at home remained in darkness. But Traoré and his allies declared no more. That gap of $140 would no longer feed the wealth of others. It would build schools, hospitals, roads in Africa. My people, that was not economics. That was revolution, for in that single act, centuries of extraction were challenged. And when the news reached Moscow, the Kremlin did not smile. They frowned. For 20 years, Russia's strategy had been simple. Wait until Africans grew weary of Western neglect, then step in with Russian arms, Russian advisors, Russian promises, always with Russian control. But this time, the script was torn apart. Burkina Faso was not asking Moscow for help. Mali was not waiting on Beijing for investment. Niger was not begging Paris for protection. Instead, they were reaching out to brothers and sisters across the Atlantic. African Americans, sons and daughters of the diaspora, engineers and doctors, investors and builders who carried both advanced knowledge and the memory of African soil in their veins. That was when the alarm bells rang in the Kremlin. Putin's analysts wrote daily reports. How, they wondered, could a landlocked nation with limited resources accomplish what Russia itself struggled to achieve? How could young Africans expel foreign troops without leaving a power vacuum? How could they build alliances without provoking global backlash? How could they attract investment without chains of dependency? And the most baffling of all, why were African Americans succeeding where traditional superpowers had failed? Secure telecommunication systems more advanced than Russian prototypes. Renewable energy projects more efficient than Moscow's own models. Medical training programs drawing students from across the continent, students who might once have filled lecture halls in Moscow. The reports piled on Putin's desk until a single line broke through his composure. If this African-American alliance succeeds, Russia will lose Africa without a single shot being fired. Oh, my brothers and sisters, can you feel the weight of that sentence? For the first time, the Kremlin faced not another rival empire, not another great power, but a family reunited. And no weapon, no strategy, no scheme could match the power of scattered children remembering they were kin. And so, 3 weeks later, at 3 in the morning, a phone rang in Ouagadougou. A 35-year-old revolutionary picked it up. On the line was the master strategist of Moscow. And what he said in that moment changed everything. My brothers, my sisters, lean in, for now we reach the moment where history itself held its breath. Imagine it. The clock reads 3:17 a.m. The city of Ouagadougou sleeps, yet one young leader sits awake, holding a secure satellite phone. On the other end, the line connects not to a minister, not to an ambassador, but to Vladimir Putin himself, the man who has stared down NATO, who has played chess with superpowers, who has rebuilt Russia from ashes. And he does not begin with threats, nor with arrogance. He begins with flattery. President Traoré, he says in French, a language he rarely uses, I have followed your remarkable achievements with great interest. Russia has much experience resisting Western interference. Perhaps we should discuss how our expertise could accelerate your success. Do you hear it? That is the old tune, the same melody he has played for 20 years across Africa. Partnership wrapped in dependency, support wrapped in control. For dozens of African leaders, this was the moment to bow their heads, to say yes, to welcome Russian protection in exchange for Russian influence. But not this time, not this man. For Ibrahim Traoré did not bow. He did not tremble. He spoke with the fire of a generation rising. Mr. Putin, he replied, with respect, Russia has been in Africa for 2 decades, and still you wrestle for influence with France and America. We have been truly independent for 18 months, and already we achieve results your experts declared impossible. Perhaps it is not us who should learn from you. Perhaps it is Russia that should be learning from Africa. Ah, my people, silence fell. Not the silence of a dropped call, not the silence of a poor connection, but the silence of a strategist struck to the core. For 37 long seconds, the line held nothing but breath. And I tell you, those 37 seconds shook the Kremlin more than any battlefield loss, more than any sanction, more than any Western strategy. When at last Putin spoke again, the tone had shifted. Gone was the patronizing confidence. In its place was something rarer, something almost unheard of from a world leader, genuine curiosity. President Traoré, he said slowly, what exactly are you building in Africa? And so the truth began to unfold. Traoré told him of alliances not born of fear, but of trust. He spoke of expelling foreign forces without leaving chaos, of building regional defense rooted in cooperation, not dependency. He told him of investments that empowered rather than enslaved, of decisions made in the spirit of sovereignty rather than submission. But above all, he told him of the partnership with African Americans. Men and women who carried both advanced expertise and ancestral memory. Marcus Johnson designing telecom systems that outperformed Russian security. Kwesa Williams pioneering renewable energy that left Moscow's technology behind. Dr. Michael Thompson training doctors, drawing students who once would have boarded planes to Russia. Do you see, Mr. Putin? Traoré asked. We are not trading one dependency for another. We are not replacing the West with the East. We are building something entirely new, and those who join us do not seek to control. They seek to come home. Again, silence. Again, a pause. But this time it was not shock, it was recognition. The mighty strategist of Russia was confronting a reality no empire had dared consider, that Africa did not need to be anyone's client, anyone's pawn, anyone's sphere of influence. That Africa, joined with her scattered children, could create a power untouchable by old games of domination. And then Putin uttered words that revealed his unease. President Traoré, surely African Americans expect something in return for such investment, such expertise. Traoré's answer thundered like a sermon. Yes, they expect to be welcomed home. They expect to be part of an African renaissance. They expect to help build the Africa our ancestors dreamed of before chains were placed on their wrists and ships carried them across the ocean. That is the return they seek. Not power, not control, but belonging. My elders, in that moment, the foundations trembled. For Putin saw that what unfolded before him was not simply African progress. It was a revolution in how the world understood power itself. Not dominance, but family. Not control, but reunion. Not strategic alliances, but sacred bonds. And then came the admission that shook even the Kremlin. President Traoré, Putin said, if Africans can succeed without dependency, if what you describe is true, this changes the entire global balance of power. Oh, but my brothers and sisters, the conversation was far from over. For what Putin asked next revealed not only his fear, but his hope. And the answer Traoré gave would echo far beyond Moscow, far beyond Washington, far beyond the sands of the Sahel. My beloved brothers and sisters, let us pause and witness what followed. For when a conversation shakes the very throne of the Kremlin, the ripples spread far beyond one office, far beyond one man. They reach into cabinets and parliaments, into boardrooms and war rooms, into the very imagination of nations. And so it was. 3 days after that midnight call, the reverberations could already be felt. In Moscow, whispers became alarms. An emergency meeting was called. Putin gathered his Africa advisors, the men and women who had spent 2 decades cultivating ties, negotiating contracts, offering weapons, and training in exchange for loyalty. And there, behind closed doors, the president of Russia declared, our Africa strategy must be reconsidered. The assumptions we built upon are no longer true. Do you hear that, my people? For 20 years, they assumed Africa would always need a patron. They assumed Africans could not hold alliances without a guiding hand. They assumed sovereignty was an illusion, dependency inevitable. But one conversation, one voice from Ouagadougou tore those assumptions to shreds. And the consequences came quickly. Russia shifted its proposals. No longer only about military bases, no longer about extracting resources. Now they spoke of technology partnerships, of educational exchanges. For the first time, Moscow uttered words that respected African decision-making. Why? Because they had glimpsed a future where Africa's unity made Russian influence irrelevant. But Russia was not alone in trembling. In Beijing, officials studied the reports with furrowed brows. For decades, China poured billions into infrastructure, railways, ports, pipelines. Yet here was a model with smaller budgets but stronger results, because it was built not on contracts but on kinship. The question on their lips, why are our massive investments producing less loyalty than the cultural ties of a diaspora? In Paris and Brussels, the shock was even sharper. Europe, long accustomed to assuming that history itself tied Africa to them, suddenly discovered that those colonial chains had rusted away. The younger generation of Africans spoke not of Paris, but of Atlanta. Not of Brussels, but of Brooklyn. Not of Berlin, but of Birmingham, Alabama. Blood ties had proven stronger than treaties, and heritage more binding than trade agreements. And in Washington, oh my elders, listen to this, policymakers faced an uncomfortable truth. They had long seen African Americans as a domestic constituency, a voting bloc, a community to be managed. But now, before their eyes, African Americans were becoming something greater, a bridge across the ocean, a force reshaping global influence. The question haunting the corridors of power in D.C. was not about troops or sanctions, but about family. Could it be that America's greatest global leverage was not its armies, but its African sons and daughters who chose to build bridges home? Do you see it? Every power, East and West alike, was unsettled, because what unfolded in Ouagadougou could not be bought with contracts, nor coerced with threats. It was not the logic of empire, but the language of reunion. And that language carried a strength none had anticipated. My brothers, my sisters, the impact did not stop at governments. Across the continent, ordinary Africans began to lift their heads higher. They heard that even the Kremlin had trembled before their sovereignty. They heard that even Putin, the master strategist, had paused in awe at African determination. And in the diaspora, African Americans, long searching for belonging, long carrying the scars of slavery, began to hear a new invitation: come home. Not as guests, not as outsiders, but as partners in destiny. This, my people, is the true consequence. Not only a shift in foreign policy, but a shift in self-belief. For centuries, the narrative told us Africa was too weak, too divided, too poor. But in one generation, that story is being rewritten. From weakness to strength, from dependency to independence, from division to reunion. And let me tell you, the world is watching nervously. Because if Africa and her diaspora succeed in building this model, others will follow. Armenians scattered across the globe, Indians spread across continents, Palestinians displaced by history. All may look to Africa and say, if they could reunite, why not us? My elders, the powers of the earth, do not fear a new empire rising. They fear an old family reuniting. They do not tremble at another military alliance. They tremble at a bond of love and heritage that no bullet, no sanction, no propaganda can break. And so Putin's midnight call was not the end. It was the beginning of a shift that unsettled capitals across the globe, that forced policymakers to reconsider, that made strategists rewrite their maps. But my question to you, my family, is this: if such unity can shake Moscow, if it can trouble Beijing, if it can startle Washington, what could it do in your community, in your family, in your own life? Think on it and tell me in the comments. Do you believe the unity of Africa and her diaspora can truly reshape the balance of world power? My beloved family, let us lift our eyes now beyond Ouagadougou, beyond the Kremlin, beyond the deserts of the Sahel, and look upon the nations that watched this drama unfold. For the echo of that midnight call did not stop in Moscow. It traveled across oceans. It whispered into the ears of presidents. It unsettled the boardrooms of bankers, and it stirred the imagination of peoples who had long been scattered. In Washington, the irony was bitter. For generations, America sought to project its influence abroad through bases, sanctions, and economic pressure. Yet, in the stillness of that phone call, it was revealed that America's truest global strength was not the Pentagon, but the descendants of Africa living within its own borders. Policymakers found themselves confronting a paradox. The very community they had marginalized at home was becoming the bridge that impressed even Putin. They realized African Americans were no longer only a domestic constituency, but a transnational force, a people who could not be contained within national boundaries. In Beijing, strategists felt the ground shifting beneath their feet. For decades, they had invested in ports, roads, and pipelines, believing concrete and steel would secure loyalty. Yet they saw something small but mighty: cultural connection, outpacing capital, kinship proving stronger than contracts. They asked themselves in silence, how could a family bond across an ocean carry more weight than billions of dollars in infrastructure? And in Europe, where colonial memory still lingers like a shadow, leaders realized their advantage had crumbled. No longer could they claim historical ties as leverage, for those ties were revealed as chains, and chains were meant to be broken. Younger Africans turned not to Paris or Brussels, but to Harlem, to Detroit, to Lagos, to Accra. The heartbeat of solidarity drowned out the whispers of former empires. But let us not stop there, my people, for the implications reach further still. Across the world, scattered peoples began to ask dangerous questions. If Africa and her diaspora can heal the wound of separation, why not us? Could Armenians divided across continents find strength in reunion? Could Palestinians dispersed by history rediscover sovereignty through unity? Could Latin America's diaspora become more than exiles but builders of a renaissance? That is why Putin trembled. That is why Beijing grew cautious. That is why Washington shifted in its seat. Because what was born in Africa was not only a political experiment, it was a template for global transformation. It suggested that diaspora was not a weakness to be pitied, but a hidden reservoir of power waiting to be awakened. And so, I tell you, beloved family, this is bigger than one continent, bigger than one revolution. The world is beginning to see that authentic unity does not simply challenge power, it redefines it. But there remains one more question, one more horizon, one more revelation yet to be spoken. For what Traoré told Putin at the close of their conversation was not merely about Africa's present, but about the future that terrifies every empire. My brothers, my sisters, now let us look forward, for a seed has been planted, and already the world has felt its tremor. But what of the harvest to come? What will Africa and her scattered children build in the years ahead? President Traoré spoke of it plainly to Putin, and it is a vision that deserves to be spoken from every pulpit, every classroom, every living room where our people gather. He said, "We will not stop here. Within 2 years, the alliance of 3 will become an alliance of 30. 30 African nations bound not by dependency, but by sovereignty. 30 governments standing together, declaring that the resources beneath their soil and the futures of their children are not for sale to the highest bidder." He spoke of universities, not imitations of Oxford or Harvard, but uniquely African institutions where the world will come to study. Places where advanced medicine will stand side by side with ancient healing traditions, where renewable energy will meet ancestral wisdom of the land, where students from across the globe will say, "I came to Africa to learn." He described companies born not of imitation but of originality, businesses that do not mimic Silicon Valley or Wall Street, but create solutions rooted in African soil and African imagination. Enterprises that compete in global markets not as copies, but as innovators, showing that the brilliance of Black excellence is not the exception, but the foundation. And then came the call to the diaspora, not a call of desperation, but a call of destiny. "Come home," he said, "not because Africa is broken, but because together we are building something unbreakable. Come home, not to rescue, but to rise. Come home, for the dream our ancestors carried in chains is waiting to be fulfilled in freedom." Beloved family, this is the road ahead, a road of sovereignty, of innovation, of reunion. But make no mistake, it is not without obstacles. Old powers will resist, new temptations will emerge, unity itself will be tested, yet the vision remains. A continent and a diaspora proving that love is stronger than empire and belonging more powerful than domination. And so, I ask you tonight, when the phone of destiny rings at 3 in the morning, when history calls upon us to choose between comfort and courage, between division and unity, will we have the strength to answer? My beloved family, as we close this journey, let us not forget the image that brought us here. A secure line ringing at 3 in the morning, and the most guarded man in Moscow seeking answers from a young African leader. That is not merely a story. That is a prophecy fulfilled before our eyes. Putin called Ibrahim Traoré at 3 a.m. because he saw what many still deny. Africa no longer waits for permission. Africa no longer bends beneath the weight of others' strategies. Africa has found her voice, and in that voice speaks the echo of her scattered children. What was revealed in the conversation that shook the Kremlin was more than politics, more than diplomacy. It was the unveiling of a truth long buried, that real power does not come from control, but from the ability to empower your own. That empires fall, but families endure. That unity, when it is authentic, becomes more terrifying to tyrants than any army, more disruptive than any weapon. And now, my people, the question rests not in Moscow, not in Washington, not in Beijing, but in us. Will we answer the call of history? Will we build the schools, the hospitals, the businesses that prove Black excellence is not a miracle, but a foundation? Will we show the world that the return of the diaspora is not nostalgia, but destiny? I tell you, the choice is ours. And when future generations ask what we did when the midnight phone rang, may they say we did not hesitate. May they say we stood together. May they say we answered the call. Putin called Ibrahim Traoré at 3 a.m., but the true call is ringing for us now. Will we pick it up? My brothers and sisters, if this vision stirs your heart, then do not let it end here. Share this message, subscribe to this channel, and leave your voice in the comments. Tell us, do you believe our unity can become the force that no Kremlin, no White House, no palace can withstand? For the future is calling at 3 in the morning, and the whole world is listening for our answer.